Good evening, everyone. I am Steve Straessle. I'm the principal of Catholic High School here in Little Rock and a sometimes wannabe columnist for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. I am standing in an office in a school that was closed this week because of threat of an ice storm, and it's about 37 degrees outside, and our author, Stephen Markley, is sitting in Los Angeles right now where it's like 80 degrees?
A solid 71.
A solid 71. Well, thank you for joining us, Stephen. And what a great book you have written.
Thank you.
It's such a honor to have you here with us in Central Arkansas. You've written, published this book. You have written critically acclaimed Ohio, and now you have written The Deluge, which are all great books. I haven't read Ohio yet, but I'm looking forward to it. And you have been gone since January 8th on a book tour. So that tell us what that's been like for the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, no, it's been incredible. I mean, basically just zigzagging around the country. Great events, great people I was in conversation with. And you know, not a lot of authors are getting book tours of that size right now. So I'm really grateful for it. I am totally exhausted though. So I do have to, and that's why I'm dressed like this Silicon Valley tech bro get up that I'm in. So,
well, that's all right. You can be tech bro and I'll be high school principal wear. Yeah. But so you went pretty much all over the country, I presume.
Yeah. New York, Seattle, LA, Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, Ann Arbor, East Coast, Midwest, just everywhere. So
that's awesome. Well, I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure nobody asked you quite yet. Have you ever been to Arkansas?
I have. I've been a couple times. Yeah.
Have you? What brought you to Arkansas?
Oh, just driving across the South, doing, back before I had anything to do with my time, and I was just exploring. But yeah, I have been to Arkansas.
Very nice. Well, you as a not quite a spoiler, you mentioned Arkansas in the book. And cover the New Madrid fault line pretty well. So we do get a shout out. So thank you for that. Well, The Deluge is a tome. It is a big book. It's like if you are new to driving and need help seeing over the steering wheel, this is the book for you. It's doorstop in a hurricane type book. I mean, it is. Yeah. Big book, but not one wasted word. I mean, it is like you put together a masterpiece. So it has been just exceptional. So if you can just lay out the story of The Deluge for us, that would get us started.
Yeah, well, The Deluge is a novel that begins in our recent recognizable past, elides the present, and moves into the near future. And it's about, the climate crisis. It's about what we're going to see and deal with over the course of the coming decades in terms of not just our weather, but our politics, our economics, and how it will really affect people on the ground, what it will be like to live through it.
Great. Well, the brilliance of the book is that there are waves of devastation. It's not like, so many of these apocalyptic type books where it's the meteor has hit Earth or the zombie apocalypse is upon us. It is wave after wave, and it's you get the feeling that we're tied to the tracks, and a slow moving train is coming, and it's blowing the whistle, and we're not even trying to free ourselves. So why did you take that way of doing things as opposed to just here comes the comet that's going to change everything in a day?
Yeah, I think what in the course of writing the book, what came to bother me about apocalyptic fiction, dystopian fiction, is that there's almost a revelry of it. It's this idea that, if we clear the chessboard and get rid of all the stuff that bugs us about contemporary society, we can all go back to holistic medicinal practices and subsistence farming, and everything will be honky-dory. And the novel really is about, what we're trying to save, what we're trying to do to avert that apocalypse or that dark future. And so it's filled with characters who are struggling against, the forces that be in order to preserve what we have and to make it better.
Yeah, very good. Well, what was your inspiration for it? I mean, how did this nugget turn into 900 pages?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was looking at it, as a college student, and then just shortly after I was out of college, was that this problem we have is so far gone and just so totally out of control that in order to turn things around, one of the great dramas of human history will have to unfold. So for me, it was about, as a storyteller, that's an incredible subject to tackle. So what would that look like? What kind of people would rise to meet the challenge, and what kind of forces would oppose them? And I think it just was the stuff of great narrative, great epic narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the book in two sections, if that's okay with you. First,
Yeah.
the science, and then we'll talk about the prose and talk about the characters in particular. Now, the science. So the science is extraordinary. I'm reading this thinking this guy is a climatologist. He's a scientist who's like, what's her name who wrote Where the Crawdads Sing? Delia Owens is a zoologist, so she really got into the weeds of animals and things like that. And I'm thinking this guy, he's got to have a science background, and he just happens to write fiction as well. But that's not the case, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately for me, I am just some guy. So I had to go off and learn an absolute, dump truck full of stuff, not just about the science, but about the policy, about the economics of the situation, about every conceivable topic that I needed to approach this like really gargantuan, just this gargantuan situation, but also just like all the branches of it, all the little like tributaries to the main river. So it was an enormous amount of research.
Well, how did you go about that? How did you, just some guy, gather this data that is so complex but so well explained within your book?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a challenge for me that I enjoyed was to look at each facet of this, and first of all, read enough about it and explore enough about it to give myself a basis of knowledge. And then typically, if there was a section that I thought was very important, I would go out and try to find somebody in that field to talk to about the circumstances, and ended up over the course of a decade, like interviewing more people than I can even remember. And just, basically putting my nose to the grindstone and trying to make myself confident in what I'm talking about, in what I'm writing about. And then obviously you overwrite and you put way too much research in, and then I have to like cut half of it out at the end.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So was this 900-page book started out at 1,800 pages, or?
The original first draft that I finished was 1,500 pages. So that I knew, like even I knew, you cannot publish a book that long and have any reasonable expectation anyone will read it. So
right.
There was a lot of cutting. That was a big editorial task.
Right. Well, again, there just doesn't seem to be a single word wasted within it. And I want to tell the folks who are watching right now, if you have a question for Stephen, you can just enter it into the chat, and I'll get to it as it comes up. Well, this isn't. It seems I've watched some of the interviews that you've done on Seth Meyers and elsewhere, and it seems that this isn't just a story for you. I mean, this is something that you are passionate about: decarbonization and the climate crisis and things like that. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the most important thing, not only going on right now, but basically that's happened in human history. We are rapidly approaching a point where we are destroying the set of circumstances that allowed human civilization to arise and flourish. We are polluting the atmosphere to a point of no return. And, we have precious few years left to act to turn the situation around. And the good news, though, is that we have every technology we need. Wind and solar are now the cheapest forms of energy on the planet. And really, it's a matter of speed and, what we can do collectively to turn the situation around, basically.
So you're from Ohio, correct?
I am. Go Cavs.
Okay. So how did that interest in the climate or passion about the climate get sparked for a kid in Ohio? Was there something there, or was it just a natural evolution?
No, I was in college, and it was a topic that was in the ether, and just for me, it was just a matter of looking at sort of the facts of the science of what's going to happen in my lifetime. There's a line the author David Wallace Wells has, which is that most of the damage of the climate crisis has come about since Seinfeld was on the air, right? So the largest amount of the damage has happened in my lifetime, and the consequences that we're just beginning to deal with are going to stretch into the next decades ahead. So for an author, for an aspiring writer, an aspiring author, it just seemed like a topic of such import. I more felt like, how could I not tackle it?
Okay, yeah, interesting. I watched an interview with you and Robbie Orvis at Politics and Prose. I think it was just last week in DC's Politics and Prose, and there was a back and forth where I believe you said that you sent part of the science that you wrote about to Robbie, and his response to you was, well, "What's your background in climate?" Like he thought you were a scientist. Is that right?
It was the greatest compliment I've ever received. Yeah, and that's a guy who knows the subject so thoroughly. It's staggering. And so I was just like I was very, very honored that he thought that. But all that is a reflection of the amount of work and time I had put into it at that point.
Was there one person that was really your go-to person in the science aspect of this?
Robbie became that person at the very end of the process, because I really needed somebody to just like read the whole book, and he was kind enough to to step up to the plate and do that for me. But I was on my own a lot and just trying to sort of badger people into answering this question or that question. But yeah, I mean, it was an enormous task.
Well, how do you do that? I mean, do you get online and Google who knows about polar ice cap melting, or how do you do that?
No, like you start from, I mean, there's the shelf of books I have over here on the topic of climate is enormous, right? So you start there. You start looking at what the thinking on the climate crisis is. And then if you have to dive into a particular situation, like say an enormous fire that's engulfing a city, you go in search of a UCLA fire researcher and sort of pick his brain about what would be possible in regards to a wildfire that got out of control in Los Angeles. And this is all to say, though, that like the breadth of knowledge represents 10 years of work. It's not something I was able to put together in any quick time span.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in just a second. In your Seth Meyers interview, you said something like, when you were writing the book, you felt overwhelming, constant despair, but it's a book about hope. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Totally. Once you start looking at the situation, it gets really, really frightening. Arkansas is a state on the coast. It has a coastline. And when I started looking at,
as a river,
as a river, right? You're right.
You're thinking Louisiana.
I guess I didn't do that much research. Like look at a map of the United States, right? You're right. No, you think about something like sea level rise, right?
Yeah.
And the situation is that if we have 3 feet by 2100, which is what some people think is going to happen, that's extremely frightening. If we have 6 feet, which is what NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, says we'll probably have, that's extremely frightening. And then there are, people researching glaciers in the Antarctic that are like, oh no, we might have closer to 10, 15 feet, which is like bedlam. Yeah. So when you start looking at that situation, the concern morphs into something else. It morphs into staring at the ceiling till 4 a.m. thinking about the repercussions of this. On the other hand, like I said earlier, we're also in a situation where we have every technology we need. We know every policy we need to implement. And it's just a matter of speed and sort of the cultural and social will to push our political leaders to the tipping point.
How do you do that?
Well, look, I think we made an enormous first step with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. Like that's something that's going to help electrify everything the way we need to do. and crush demand for fossil fuels. We need more, and we need more faster. But I think what my book represents, in terms of my approach to it, is that this is a situation where we are all, we have our little meager bit of agency on this planet. And especially because we live in this democracy, we're lucky enough to live in this democracy, we have control over what our political leaders do. And that's something we have to keep focusing on and keep pushing. And I know I got a lot of questions on my tour. I know it's extremely frustrating. And I know like big social change is extremely frustrating. But at the same time, of course it is.
Yeah.
Right. Like enormous change isn't made without that part. So.
Right. Absolutely. So the Inflation Reduction Act is the most significant climate legislation in U.S. history. And it changed a whole lot of stuff late in the game for your book. How did you work with that when, you've got this book, 10 to 12 years in the making, and suddenly here's this climate gift, so to speak, and you're like, what do I do now? What did you do?
Yeah. Well, because the book aligns the present, I had this set of lines in there that basically represented what was going to happen with climate policy between 2020 and 2025, right? And so as this bill is like struggling through Congress, I'm trying to decide what I should write about the situation in the book. I had fourth pass in my hands, and it looked like the bill was dead. So I sent it off back to Simon & Schuster, and I was like, okay, let's go. And then, of course, the bill's resurrected and passes in like immediately after, which was incredibly frustrating. I mean, I was sobbing with relief, but also it was incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
And so in the next edition, there will actually be a sort of like updated like few sentences that reflect the Inflation Reduction Act and what it might do, what it possibly will do. So that's kind of how I dealt with it. And that's just a plea for people to buy more than one edition of the book. Let's move more units here.
That works. That's right. That's capitalism. You wrote the book over a 10 to 12 year period. So, so the nugget of thought that, started back in Ohio or whenever kind of grew, but it still took 10 to 12 years to bring it to publication. So why did it take so long? Other than there are a lot of words in it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, well, first off, just like the enormity of finishing any novel, it always takes longer than you think. I did set it aside to finish Ohio. So I had about 40% written. I was working on Ohio and the Deluge at the same time. And when Ohio sold to Simon & Schuster, I set the Deluge aside, finished Ohio. And as soon as that was done, like went right back and picked it up. And so I probably had the first draft totally completed. It would have been 2020. February of 2020 was when I turned it in. And then it was just, 2 years of editing. That was a major part of the process.
Wow. So in 10 to 12 years, not only did the Inflation Reduction Act come at the very end, but a whole lot of climate science changed in that time. Solar became more popular, more affordable, wind, more feasible. How did you work with that? Were you finding you were going back to chapter 4 or whatever and saying, I gotta put something about solar in here?
It was a lot of that sort of scrambling to keep up with the changing dynamics of the situation. And like I've been saying, it was sort of like the task of making the teeth of the zipper meet, right? Like, so that when the book came out, it reflected as much about our reality as I could possibly get, including the location of Arkansas, which I'm now mortified that this will be. Everybody's going to be like, this guy researching all this stuff, and he doesn't know where I am.
Yeah, well, that's okay. We're
that didn't change. Folks. That stayed the same, right? But no, it was such a research project, like an epic research project, and of course that meant updating going back through the book on every pass and just saying like, does this still make sense? Does this still work?
Yeah.
Does this? So.
Yeah, very good. I'm not a science guy. I'm a liberal arts guy through and through. So when I started reading the science, I started thinking, oh gosh, it's going to put me to sleep. But you covered it so well. You took complex material, that I would have, had my head down in any professor's lecture talking about.
Yeah.
But you made it very much into a easy to follow narrative and made it conversational and things like that. It was just such a gift to the book for those of us who, aren't really all that interested in math and science and prefer liberal arts. So that was excellent.
As my own mother said when she interrupted my reading in Cincinnati, she told the audience, he's making it sound real sciencey and dense, but it's actually quite a thriller. And she went on like that for 5 minutes or so. So
your mother stood up.
Mom, yeah. And then people were just asking her questions. And I was like, Mom, I wrote this 1,000-page novel. You did not. But no, it is meant to be engrossing and to pull the reader along and to just sort of, in a way it is a thriller. It's about, the race to the end. I definitely think like if all that you take from it is the enjoyment, the engrossing nature of the read, then that's perfectly fine by me.
Yeah. Well, again, just some really complex stuff written so very well that even a liberal arts major can understand it. So, that was.
I was a liberal arts major too. So,
well, that's what's so impressive. I mean, you are speaking my language and using science, which is just such a feat. Well, so in your research was. What was the most frightening part of your research? I mean, was there something that you were like, how come more people don't know this? Because I felt like there were some scenes in the book where it was like, oh my gosh, this could happen. Was there one thing that stood out?
I think for me, it's less about the individual disasters because we deal with individual disasters on a fairly constant basis. So it's not any particular fire or drought or storm. It's more the accruing effect of all these things on our human systems, on our politics and our economy, and how when you start to pull the bolts out of the plane, how long can the plane stay together? It's that kind of fear, I think. So the overall effect on our systems.
Yeah, very good. A couple of questions from the audience. Bonnie wants to know, did you work with your editor before, or was this kind of, culture shock for your editor when you handed over 1,500 pages and they said, we got to get rid of 600?
I've had 2 editors for my 2 major books. Both of them have quit after finishing working with me. So I don't know what that says, but my editor did an amazing job. I mean, when I turned it into him at about 1,200 words, and his big editorial note was, of course, this has to be shorter. And not just in terms of like what it costs Simon and Schuster to ship copies of it, but like back to what I was saying, his point was, if you want people to engage with all this dense sort of research and science, et cetera, then the ability to make the book hurdle, to make it move, to make it engrossing is going to be key. And he was absolutely right.
Yeah, very good. Kevin is along the same lines. He says, of all the material you cut from your original 1,500 pages, what were you sorriest to jettison? Were there any points of view that used to be in the book and aren't there at all anymore? I mean, was there something that you took out that you're looking back on, man, I wish I'd left that in?
No, because once you've cut something, you start to rework it, and then eventually it doesn't fit anymore. And so the version of this book like couldn't fit any of the cut material, basically. I think one of the toughest parts for me was like when you do all this research and when you've like burdened yourself in order to get the depth of knowledge, and then suddenly all of that, your 15 pages of ocean acidification research is down to a sentence. Like that's a little tough. And you want to like shake people and tell them, wait, I did more research than this. It's like, it means this, and this. And you don't have that luxury. So I think that's sort of like the part for me that was the most difficult, taking that scalpel and trying to bit by bit excise it.
Yeah. Babe kind of has a question. Do you think it's weird that so many people trust a dang groundhog over literally thousands of actual scientists? Is that part of the problem?
No, I haven't thought about it in those terms before. But you know, I think I think that the the problem of people not believing what is happening is actually smaller than is reflected by our media, if that makes sense. I think a lot of people, including Republicans and conservatives, understand the situation and are definitely like looking for solutions that fit in with sort of the ideological program that they believe in. And I'm not even like saying I'm necessarily against that, but one of the most frustrating things about this is that like we think it's impossible to use a simple market mechanism like a carbon price but like a carbon price would be incredible. Like that would fix the problem in an enormous way or go a long way towards it. Right. And so, you know, when these solutions come out of conservative thinking and we don't have the political will to implement them, that becomes incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, problematic for sure. Okay, so let's shift to the prose and the storyline in general. Now, a lot has been said about the ringing endorsements that Stephen King has given you. I mean, he is like your personal PR guy.
It's amazing.
It is incredible. He said, if I remember correctly, The Deluge is the best book he read in 2022, even before it was released to the public in 2030. The best book of the year that he read. So that's pretty incredible stuff.
I mean, it's just amazing. And I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I still am like a little, like, it hasn't quite sunk into me yet. Because like when I was a kid, you know, I was staying up till 3 a.m. reading everything the guy ever wrote. Like ages 11 to 14, I read everything he had written and I just could not put his novels down. And so like, you know, my 11-year-old self would have fainted on the floor if he had known this was coming. And the guy is amazing. You know, he picked Ohio up at his local bookstore and tweeted about it. And that was an enormous moment. And then with The Deluge, you know, I feel like he's done more for me than I have done by traveling to all these cities and, you know, doing my little tap dance in front of people. It's really incredible.
Well, I mean, it's got to feel incredible. The backstory is he was in one of some bookstores somewhere in Ohio, was on a end of a bookshelf, and he picked it up and devoured it. He said he loved it. And of course, when he tweets about it, then that means 1 million people or more are going to hear his views on your book. I mean, that's got to be just an incredible feeling. Well, speaking of Stephen King, so The Stand, and he actually referenced that The Deluge is scarier than The Stand because it could happen, you know, because it could be nonfiction. And I picked up The Stand 3 times in my adult life to try to read it. And this was before, you know, shows like The Walking Dead and Invisible Plagues and things like that. I was like, gosh, I don't know that I can finish this. Well, a couple of years ago, I read The Stand. I was in Boulder, Colorado. I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to stick with it and finish it. And by the time I finished it, I was missing the characters that he had built within that novel. And I love that feeling. Yeah. Yes, and I feel the same way about The Deluge. I feel like those characters are sticking with me and were just so well built that, you know, they seem like real people. And you know, when you invest some time into a book like this, then, you know, they feel like old friends and you don't want to see them go. So all that to say is the character development obviously was intrinsic to the success of the book. So I'd like to know which character is your favorite one.
Yeah, it's like picking your favorite child. You can't really, you can't tell them even if you have one. No, I mean, I think like there were characters that were easier or harder to write. There were characters that, you know, depending on their fate in the book, it became more difficult to re-edit those sections over and over again when you're leading them to this fate. And you know, I think the perspective in the book that I think is most vital is actually Keeper's. You know, this is a character who not only doesn't believe in climate change, doesn't even really care and doesn't care about much outside of his very sort of narrow, trying to survive sort of worldview. And his perspective, I think, like, opens the book up because he's living on the ground in the midst of all these disasters. And his perspective really gives the book this other angle that it otherwise wouldn't have had. Every other character is sort of driven by a goal to arrest the crisis, and he is outside of that. So
yeah,
I guess.
So other than Keeper, can you give a one sentence description of each of the other main characters?
Okay. We have Shane is an eco-terrorist working underground, basically building a network to blow up gas pipelines and on oil infrastructure. Matt is a guy who goes out west after college to find adventure and instead meets a woman named Kate Morris. And Kate is an activist working above ground on the climate crisis. And she is sort of the heart and soul of the book. She's sort of its beating heart. And then there's Tony, who's a scientist, and he is a very persnickety type. He has a lot of strong opinions. He doesn't like bullshit. And Tony, has 2 daughters and he's a widow. And so that his love for his daughter sort of animates his story. It's my book and I'm blanking on the rest. Oh, Jackie is Jackie works in PR and advertising, and she is recruited by a consortium of the fossil fuel industry, basically the carbon lobby, to come up with an ad campaign to sort of stop action on the crisis. And then there's Keeper, of course, who I just mentioned, who is a drug addict living in a small town in Ohio.
Yeah. So I wanted you to go through all that to set up the next question, and that is, which one do you identify with the most?
I mean, I think when it comes to characters, you have to identify with all of them in some way. Like you have to have a seed that makes sense to you, or they're not going to work, because you want the reader to believe them. You want the reader to grapple with their thinking. And I think one of the best compliments I've gotten on the book was from Neil McRoberts on this podcast I did, where he was saying, he'd be in the eco-terrorist perspective and be like, oh, this woman's right. Like, this is the only way forward. And then you switch over to Kate and he was like, no, she's right. And I think that ability to shift viewpoint and shift sort of the fundamental way one thinks about the world is vital to creating a good character.
Yeah, it is, like I said, a character-driven book. And so many times you'll read a book and the characters have a different version of the same personality. Their dialect is pretty much the same and so forth, and they're real predictive. But these characters have nothing in common. Like, you created individuals from scratch, and they are all so believable, and some of them are so different from you. And so how did you do that? You had to research the science in order to get the whole climate stuff down to where a liberal arts major could understand it. But you had to have done something with the characters. Did that just come from just your experience, or is it what's the trick?
I just think writing a character is such an odd alchemy. There's not really any math for it. And I've been working at this craft for a long, long time. Even though this is my second novel, it's like I've been pursuing this since I was a kid. And to me, every great character is crafted from this combination of sort of shards that you're piecing together. Maybe you knew somebody once who had affects like this, or maybe you have a friend, or you see someone in the public, the public eye that you sort of like take a bit from, and it all goes into this blender, and then out comes sort of this person. And at first, you don't really know them well enough to write them well, and so those first few chapters are always like touch and go. But by the time you finish the novel, you can go back and you've understood them so much better. And so like you're saying, like how they all sound different. It's like, because you can start to hear them in your head. You can go back and change that dialogue as you go along. So it's just about putting the work in. That's all it is.
I loved Ash, the mathematician.
Oh, I
who
forgot to
is,
mention it.
yeah, that's okay. He is,
Sorry, you can tell I just got done with my book tour because my brain is like leaking out my ears in front of you. I keep having to like press it back in.
we're just glad you joined us tonight after a big book tour for the last 3 weeks. So,
Sorry, you were
nope.
saying Ash. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Ash, just a really cool character, mathematician, and at one point, and you described this so well, and I want to get back to some of your descriptions, but you described it so well where he's writing a white paper on food shortages, on starvation, and the way he's doing it is by denying himself calories and his toddler son calories, and his instinct for survival goes from the family has to survive all the way down to now it's individual survival, and I've got to survive. And the white paper concludes, and I'm not giving any spoilers here, but it's hey, one of the things we could do is stop feeding our pets and start eating them. And that was such an Ash thing to say. So
Yeah.
what a great character he was as well.
Thank
Now,
you. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. What was please go ahead.
I was going to say, now, what about the pastor? Where did the pastor come from?
The pastor was a minor character in the novel at first. And then sort of after in my opinion, the chaos we saw between 2016 and 2020 in the political realm, I decided that the chaos that I was creating in the novel was not quite realistic enough because it had already far surpassed what I had envisioned. And so the pastor sort of came about as what would a successful, zealot look like stepping into the political realm? How would they be successful? And so I began to think about sort of the way in which a very frightening person could rise to power. And that, was one of the elements of the book that I certainly scared myself with because I don't think it's necessarily that unrealistic.
Yeah, he was a terrifying figure in the book, and also so normal and a little familiar. And so that's what made it even more terrifying. Now, Kevin asked, how much did you know about the direction your characters' lives would eventually follow when you were writing the early sections of the book? That's a great question.
That's a great question. Yeah. There were some characters like with Tony, who opens the book. I had his final moment, or the final moment of his story, in my head from the very beginning. Like, I knew exactly who he was going to be talking to, where he was going to be standing. I knew how the conversation would go. So it's like I had that North Star with Tony that I could follow the whole course of the book. Yeah. With a character like Jackie, her ending ended up changing enormously, because I was maybe 70% of the way through the novel. I remember where I was. I was standing in my apartment in Iowa City, Iowa, brushing my teeth, when just like this totally different fate for Jackie occurred to me. And I was like, oh, damn, like that is what's going to happen. And it was just it's one of those weird moments when you're just like, the course of your novel changes in an instant. And, I'm grateful for it because I think it is a very arresting conclusion. But it's one of those things where you try to plot it out, and then if there's like a fortuitous thing that happens in your brain, you're like, oh no, I just thought of something better. That's a really good feeling.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good answer. So the descriptions that you had, everything from how your characters are thinking about things was so original, even to the point, and I wish I could remember which character it was talking about a memory of comfort. And the memory was there was when they were a kid, there was a lice outbreak at school, and the parents had to check their heads when they got home, and the mother's fingers rolling through the hair, checking for lice. That was just such a comforting, memory for this character. And I thought, that is fascinating. Where did you come up with that description? How did you think that checking for lice is somehow everybody's going to go, yeah, I can see how that's pretty comforting.
Yeah, no, I don't know. You're as a writer, you're always just looking for those little like found moments of humanity, you know, those little details that don't, you know, might not occur to everybody in like the normal sense, but when it meets character, it brings the character to life a little bit. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess maybe I liked lice checks when I was a kid. I'm not sure. But it just was one of those things. I was, you know, you're writing along and it's like, oh yeah. This is what Jackie would feel about her mother, or this is a memory she would have. And yeah, it's, you know, it's one of the, again, the alchemy is hard to explain. It's just one of those things you're always searching for.
Yeah. You get rolling, you're brushing your teeth, and next thing you know, you've got a new description. Well, I am, again, just so taken with the how you paint a scene. And of course, the character development, I'm taken with that. I'm taken with the science behind everything. And I'm really taken with how you paint a scene. So I know you're tired, but I do want to read. This is one of my favorite scenes. So, and I'm going to have you comment on it in a second. This is Los Angeles is on fire. And you've probably been asked this a dozen times about this scene. Los Angeles is on fire. And here it is. It's, I don't have my glasses on, so kind of bear with me here. He heard the horses whinny before he saw the animal. It came streaking out of a yard, its fur smoking, hurtling into the street in a panic, and Tony slammed the brakes. The horse had a choice, either dart across the road or pull back to avoid him, and it lost itself in indecision. So Tony made the choice, yanking the wheel hard left, missing the animal, crashing into a blue recycling bin, and he thought he was safe when something to the right of the car exploded. The way his skull smacked the window felt like a bat to the side of the head. He lost control of the SUV and found himself spinning, and he felt the tree catch the hood with a simultaneous crunch of metal and pop of the airbag. And he thought he was blacking out, but maybe not. Maybe he was smelling himself burning alive. Holy cow. Right now, people in Arkansas are Googling, where do I pick up the deluge? That is such a great description, a great scene. So tell me about writing the LA fire.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the books. It's one of the big tentpole moments. And in God, I keep forgetting the year. I apologize. I think it was 2017. You know, there was a fire at the hillside that I can see through my window, like the big mountain range in Los Angeles. And basically like a text went out, like a text to LA County, like, hey, everybody in LA County, prepare just in case you have to evacuate.
Wow.
And it was at that point that I was kind of like, yeah, what would that look like if a fire got out of control in Los Angeles? And that led me down a lot of rabbit holes about like, you know, fires in the county and like what the potential is for one of those to get truly, truly dreadful. And then just imagining that, and then imagining one of my characters having to go into it for a very important reason that we won't give away. And, you know, what I wanted from that was, you know, the book, that section has kind of been marching along. You're sort of steadily paced throughout that section, that part of the novel. And then suddenly it all turns kinetic. And it's just this one person driving into a firestorm, and you want the reader like to feel every single moment of that, every detail. And that was kind of my thinking behind it.
Yeah, well, you were successful for sure. Again, you know, the science, the characters, the descriptions, all just meshed together so well to make this book such a masterpiece, as Stephen King called it. Now, it seems like many well-read authors, they name drop in their books, meaning they drop in the titles of books that were important to them at some point in their lives, you know, Catcher in the Rye or whatever. And you drop a few throughout your book, whether you meant to pay homage to them or just they were on your mind. Are there other writers? Obviously, Stephen King is a great influence. Are there other writers that you know did this for you, that influenced you?
There are so many writers. It's almost hard to wrap one's mind around. I do think in the novel, though, one of the tactics that I talk about that I use is if I have a character who is a reader, I will go and read a bunch of books I think they would read, right? in order to just sort of feel what it's like to be in their head, right? And so like for Kate Morris, for instance, like early on, I was like, okay, she has been reading Rebecca Solnit religiously her entire life. Like, and so you'll see bits and pieces of Kate sort of, referencing Rebecca Solnit in one way or the other. And then, I always think it's fun to throw in a wink here or there to other authors. And so there, the book is scattered with those, of course. But I read such an enormous amount. I mean, even outside of what I read for the book, I read an enormous amount. I mean, I think it's like the great pleasure of life is being a reader. And so you're constantly just inundating yourself, and who knows what's going to pop out in your writing from it. So.
Right. And you paid homage to Stephen King, mentioned The Stand a couple of
course.
times.
Of course. Yeah.
Now, I checked out your bio online, and there's not much there other than he writes really great books. So can you tell me a little bit more about, where you come from, Ohio? What's your arc? How did you get from Ohio to,
I'm so sorry. It's going to be so disappointingly boring. I went to college at Miami of Ohio. After school, sort of drove around the country until I ran out of money. Then I moved to Chicago, where I worked in a series of low-paying jobs. I've delivered pizza before. I've worked in a kitchen before, like that kind of stuff. And then at some point in Chicago, I started writing for a newspaper called The Red Eye that is no longer, doesn't exist anymore. And just sort of found a little success that way. And eventually I published this book. And that, was extremely exciting, but didn't really like sell much and didn't really like do much for my career. And so at some point I applied to the Iowa Writers Workshop. And that I got in there, it would have been 2013. And that was really the thing that sort of turned my life in this direction. Like, it was a real catalyst to the success I'm finding now. It was this place where not only were the professors, the people teaching at the head of the classroom so incredible, but also all my peers were so incredible and smart and funny and just brilliant. And I mean, in my class alone, Garth Greenwell, Jamel Brinkley, Fatima Mirza, just like terrific writers. And I'm still friends with a bunch of those people. And it's been just such a privilege to have gone through that. So I was back in Iowa City recently, just sort of feeling all the nostalgia. And then David Milch, who did NYPD Blue and Deadwood, stopped by the workshop because he's an alum. And he was like, hey, if anybody has a screenplay, I'd love to read it. And he read a screenplay that I'd written a few years earlier that I just sort of had lying around. And that sort of set me on my course to Los Angeles, where, I've been plugging away at this Hollywood thing for a few years. And so I've written for Only Murders in the Building a couple seasons. Ohio kind of went through the optioning process. And I'm just trying to, I think television is a fascinating format, and I'd like to try to pursue it and build something of my own. So that's kind of the whole story.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's a long way from, delivering pizzas. So very good. So
I wasn't very good at delivering pizzas anyway. I was late. They were cold. It wasn't good.
Yeah, you were in trouble all the time, I'm sure. So the TV show, tell me the name of it again. I'm sorry. I just
Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin Short, and Selena Gomez.
Okay. And so you actually had a little bit of success with your screenplay before you had a success as a novelist?
No, the screenplay I was referring to was just some thing I had lying around.
Okay.
But this big time TV guy, David Milch, read it and thought it was great. And so through that sort of moment, or that, like, I ended up finding an agent out here at CAA. Nice. And it sort of like led me out here. And, I did the whole starving artist thing again for a few years while I adjuncted and edited it and got fired from editing and like all the rest. So I've just been, I think the only thing I've really been successful at is perseverance, is just kind of like being too stubborn to give up. And that has more to do with any success than anything else.
Very good. So the Iowa Writers Workshop, did you were you workshopping the Deluge, or were you workshopping something else, or?
Yeah, I mean, I landed there and I was workshopping chapters from the Deluge and pieces of Ohio immediately. And I think like I was a writer. I arrived there with some raw talent, and I didn't even realize how much I needed sort of the focus and direction and mentorship provided by that program. And you know, I think I came out of it with two pretty damn good novels. So I'm still like, it like sometimes haunts me that there's like an alternate universe version of me that didn't go to Iowa. Like that freaks me out. So
That's great. So what's your writing process? We had this other author a couple of weeks ago named Eli Craner. He's an Arkansas boy, wrote a great book called Don't Know Tough. And he said his writing process is he gets up at 4:45 every morning and writes from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., which sounds terrible. But
yeah.
So how do you do
Agree.
it? How do you?
I sure as hell don't get up at 4:45. That's I'm more like a 10:30 dude, you know, like that's kind of my way of like, but yeah, I think like, and if anybody out there is an aspiring writer, I think making it a regularized part of your life is the key, right? Like finding whatever time you can fit in and just trying to do it at roughly the same time under roughly the same circumstances is really the way to go about it. So I get up, I put on the coffee, I don't eat breakfast, I sit down, I drink coffee, my fingers go to the keyboards, and it's just like the signal to my brain, because it's so regular, is, oh, it's time to have fun. It's time to play in the sandbox. It's time to invent, be creative. And it's my favorite part of the day. It's really the moment I love the most. So
yeah. And it sounds like you just answered my next question. What do you like most about being a writer, about being a novelist in particular?
Yeah, it's the creative part. You know, it's like all the you know, this press thing I've been doing and talking to you and all of that. It's good and it's nice because you want to get recognition, and it's why we do this, right? But it's also something I would do if none of it had happened. You know, like I'd be that person putting a novel away every couple of years on my hard drive that no one would ever read. It's just, since I was a little kid, it's what I've always loved to do.
Yeah. What about the most challenging thing of the writing process for you?
I think, okay, the second most challenging is sort of this stuff is like when you have to go out and talk about it, and not because like I get any particular nervousness about it. It's more so that it's so difficult to describe this sort of like ineffable thing that like isn't really like concrete enough to get across. And so I'm like, I'll answer a question and be like, did I just spend like 5 minutes mumbling nothing? Was there any coherent idea in what you just said? And then the other thing I think is tough is the editorial process. Like when you really have to get into perfecting the novel, that's the point when everything gets frustrating, and you're just rereading. You read my near 900-page book once. I've read it like over 100 times. You know, it's like when you're on that 105th time and you're just like, oh my God, I don't know if I can read this scene again. That gets tough.
I got you. That's great. So you deserve a break after reading a 900-page novel 100 times, but do you have one of those nuggets for a next book swirling around that you're starting to put chapters down, or are you just kind of taking a break right now so you can have some time to figure it out?
No, I'm full steam ahead. So I have a new 2-book deal with Simon & Schuster, and I have both of those books kind of, one of them I'm working on more formally, and the other one is like a pile of notes growing bigger and taller. And so those will be a few years away, but yeah, I am just totally like a back to work kind of person. Like I just want to be doing it.
Yeah. Can you give us any insight into those 2 books, or is that
I really can't. It's
fair enough.
It's they're still in the stove cooking. So
fair enough. Yeah. So I teach a bunch of teenagers, and some of them are really, really good writers. Mm-hmm. What's the best advice that you can give a youngster in terms of writing in general, or a writing career in particular?
Okay, yeah, the two different answers to that. The one is I think everybody should write or do something creative with their lives. You know, it's and not even to become a famous, successful author, but I just think like we so often ignore our creative sides, and it's to a real detriment in terms of our, you know, our psychic being in the world. You know, like just the way we live in the world. Like being creative, I think, is such a joy that a lot of people don't bother with. And I think like it's really important, especially for teenagers, to stick with that sort of thing, even if it doesn't lead to the career necessarily. If you really want to go the distance and do the creative career, especially as a writer, it's like it's what I just said. It's that perseverance. You know, I was 35, 36 years old when Ohio came out. So I had been, you know, well out of college. I'd been an adult. I'd watched all my friends like start to make money, have families, get houses. I was living in an apartment with two other dudes in Los Angeles who are younger than me, and just still plugging away. And I think it's you know, you have to develop this thick skin. You have to develop this ability to handle rejection, and you know, you have to like cultivate that sort of resilience. And it's tough. It is really hard. It's emotionally exhausting. And so just if you're going to go after it, like just know that ahead of time.
Yeah. Perseverance is always a great quality. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for persevering through our visit tonight after being on the road for so long. I want to thank the Central Arkansas Library System, the Six Bridges Book Festival for putting this together for us. Nathan Smith, of course, handled all the technical stuff that Stephen and I could not have figured out on our own by a long shot, but it was a great visit, Stephen. And if you're ever in Arkansas, we would love to have you and host you here at the library and talk more about books. So thanks to all of you for joining us. Stephen, thanks again for taking time with us. That's it for tonight. Yes, sir.